On a warm June night in 1992, an 18-year-old hairdresser named Katie Ratcliffe left a nightclub in Surrey and began the familiar walk home. Sadly, she never made it. And just before sunrise, her body was discovered. Katie had been stabbed again and again in a frenzy so brutal that detectives believed they were hunting a sadistic adult male, a psychopath, a monster likened to Jack the Ripper. They were wrong, because the person responsible for Katie's death wasn't a man at all. The killer wasn't even an adult. She was a 12-year-old girl. Her name was Sharon Louise Carr, and the media would later call her the Devil's Daughter, not just because she killed, but because she thoroughly enjoyed it. She wrote about it, she fantasized about doing it again, and she showed none of the remorse, confusion, or fear you'd expect from a child. And this raises a question we are forced to confront in this case and others like it. Are killers like this born, or are they made? Tonight, we're diving into a case that pushes the limits of what we think we know about violent offenders, a case that challenges our assumptions about gender, age, motive, and the darkest corners of the human mind. Because what happened to Katie Ratcliffe wasn't just a murder. It was the beginning of one of the most chilling criminal profiles in British history. And the most terrifying part, Sharon Carr wasn't finished.
What you can't explain is coming back again. I can see it now, I can see it now. What you can't explain, coming back again.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another coffee and crime time. So I stumbled upon this case accidentally. I had never heard about it before. I was actually looking into another case, the Belize Ripper, which I still want to cover. There's just really not a lot of information out there, but I know the information's out there somewhere, and I'm going to find it and hopefully make this video. But somewhere in the process of my research into that case, I came across Sharon Carr's name because she was born in Belize. And when I started reading about Sharon, I was absolutely shocked. I knew I had to tell you about her. I knew we had to talk about this case. Sharon Louise Carr, often referred to as the Devil's Daughter, has remained one of the most unsettling figures in modern British criminal history, not only because of the nature of her crimes, but because of how young she was when she committed her crimes and when her violence escalated. Sharon is referred to as the youngest female murderer in the UK. And yes, I know what people are going to say. It's already been said. It is true that Mary Bell, who killed 2 young boys in 1968, she was younger than Sharon, being only 10 when she first struck. But Mary was actually convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Sharon Carr would be convicted of murder, not manslaughter. So she technically is the youngest female convicted murderer in the UK. It's a technicality, but that is what she's technically known as. Additionally, what sets Sharon Carr apart is the victim she chose. We are going to talk about this more and kind of really detail how what Sharon Carr did is virtually unheard of, why she's considered so dangerous, and why her name still brings with it a wave of fear and horror. So let's just kind of leave it at that for now. That Sharon Carr and her situation, her case is very unique, very, very unique. And then I'll tell you why later. But first, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Helix Sleep. Now that the nights are getting longer and colder, this is the season where comfort really matters. You can have the softest sheets and the coziest blankets and four fluffy dogs next to you in bed, but none of it means much without a great mattress underneath you, and that's where Helix comes in. Now, I've had my Helix mattress for a while now. I would say since 2019, maybe even sooner. And it's honestly been such a game changer for my sleep. I found mine by taking their quick sleep quiz. It matches you to the perfect mattress based on your body type, how you sleep. Like, do you like to sleep on your side, your back, your stomach? If you're a crazy person, you sleep on your stomach. I don't know how people sleep on their stomach, but also it's going to ask you what kind of feel you like in a mattress. Do you like something firmer, something softer? Do you sleep hot? Do you sleep cold, etc.? And I got paired with the Helix Midnight Luxe. It's just been incredible, and it's just as good today as it was when I got it and slept on it for the first time years ago. I wake up with zero stiffness. The support is exactly right. It's soft enough to sink into, but firm enough that I don't wake up with a sore back. And my Helix mattress showed me that sleep quality really does affect everything: my energy, my focus, even how patient I feel during the day. And this time of the year, I'm all about creating that warm, cozy atmosphere. And honestly, it starts with rest. Whether I'm researching cases late into the night or editing for hours, knowing I'll end the day sinking into a mattress that's actually made for me, it makes such a difference. And another thing is that I want to point out, if you're getting ready to host family for the holidays, or if you have family or friends staying at your house anytime, Helix is also a lifesaver. I upgraded my guest room with a Helix mattress topper recently, and my guest actually asked what brand it is, which tells you everything you need to know. Helix even has a full line of mattress toppers now, so you can customize your sleep or upgrade an older bed without replacing the whole thing. Helix is one of the most awarded mattress brands out there. Their Midnight Luxe has been named Best Overall Mattress by Forbes and Wired. That's the mattress I have, so I chose right. It actually chose me. Technically, it chose me. So the Midnight Luxe chose right. And keep in mind, every mattress comes with a 120-night sleep trial, which means you get to try it out in your home. You don't have to go to a mattress store and lay on a bare mattress that God knows how many other people have laid on, while salespeople hover around you, making you feel like you have company in your bedroom. You can have the Helix mattress shipped to you. You can try it out in your own home, in your own bedroom, in private, and see the difference it makes for yourself. Helix mattresses also ship for free in the US. It's going to show up at your door. It's going to be all bundled up in there, and you're going to be like, how is this mattress going to, turn into this big fluffy thing that Stephanie told me about? It will. Trust me. It's going to expand. It's going to be beautiful. If I can do it, you can do it. So if you've been thinking about finally investing in your sleep or upgrading before the holidays for guests, this is the perfect time. All you have to do is visit helixsleep.com/Harlowe to take advantage of Helix's Black Friday exclusive partner offer and get 27% off site-wide. Once again, that's helixsleep.com/Harlowe for 27% off everything on their site. And while you're there looking at mattresses or mattress toppers, I highly suggest you check out their pillows, because Helix's pillows are unmatched. They're very much like those hotel pillows you get where you go and you stay at a hotel and the pillows are just amazing, and then you get home and you sleep on your own pillows and you're like, man, I wish I had those hotel pillows. Helix has them. They're amazing. Very, very good pillows. Check them out. Check Helix out. Get yourself a new mattress. Thank you so much to Helix Sleep for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. As always, to understand what happened at the end, we have to go back to the beginning. Sharon Louise Carr was born on December 21st, 1979 in Belize, which at that time was a British colony known as British Honduras. Belize in the 1970s and 80s was facing massive economic hardship, and the people who lived there struggled with high unemployment, limited industry, low wages. A large percentage of the population was living in poverty, including Sharon and her family. So the timeline of Sharon's upbringing and family dynamics is an indication of how chaotic and stressful things would have been. Sharon's mother, Maria, was described as having an explosive temper, often behaving erratically and doling out physical punishment to her children whenever the mood struck. She was basically described as being just very volatile, like you never knew who you were going to get, and if she got upset even a little bit, it was just this enormous overreaction. She was not emotionally regulated. Now, Sharon would not remember her biological father, who was reportedly a drunk, and one day he just up and abandoned his family when Sharon and her younger brother Raymond were still just babies. So Sharon's mother, Maria, married Leslie Carr, a Jamaican man serving in the British Army, and this happened when Sharon was just 3 years old. Now, at that time, the British Army had a major role in Belize due to territorial tensions with Guatemala, and so many women in Belize would actually end up marrying British servicemen who would then be relocated to other areas of the world, which is exactly what happened with the Carr family. Leslie ended up being transferred to Germany for a short time before he and his family, which included Maria, Raymond, and Sharon, they would end up in Surrey, England, and they would settle down in Old Dean, a suburb of Camberley. So this happened in 1986, and it was 5 years after Belize had gained its independence from Britain, but those born in Belize before independence were still considered British subjects. So the move to England, it made sense. It would have provided the Carrs with a better life, and it would have been a pretty easy transition. There's no immigration paperwork to fill out. You don't have to, wait for permission to move there. Since Sharon and her family were considered British subjects, all they basically had to do was pack up and leave. And for many people, especially those struggling in Central America, the UK represented safety and opportunity. It offered higher income jobs, access to healthcare, and also better education options for the children. Now, things in Surrey should have been easier and more peaceful, but the relationship between Sharon's mother, Maria, and her stepfather, Leslie, was marked by volatility, arguments, and violence pretty much from day one. Although the couple would go on to have 2 more children, because that sounds like a good idea, they were on the fast track to divorce pretty much since they got married. And one day, Leslie came home and told Maria that he wanted to end things. In response, Maria poured a pot of boiling fat over her husband's head, which, remember, like I said, Maria doesn't have a super good, capacity to emotionally regulate. She overreacts to things, and nobody wants to hear, I'm leaving you or I want a divorce. And maybe we sometimes feel like pouring something hot over someone's head, but definitely still an overreaction. But this action on Maria's part led to both herself and her husband, Leslie, having to go to the hospital and be treated for burns. Now, when asked about this incident later, Leslie Carr described the searing pain he had felt when the boiling fat hit him. But he also seemed more focused on how shocked he was by the behavior of Maria's young daughter, Sharon, who actually witnessed the event. So Leslie said that Sharon just stood there and watched like she was learning, absorbing the violence. She wasn't horrified. She wasn't disgusted. She wasn't scared. She didn't cry or scream and run from the room. She just watched, her face completely calm and expressionless. Maria would end up being charged with assault, but she recovered from her disappointment quickly and soon married another man, Stanley Newman, who worked as a laborer and who was a father to 2 young girls. Stanley moved in with Maria and her children in 1991, but by then, Sharon Carr was already out of control. Sharon attended Collingwood College, which is a secondary school with a 6th form. So Collingwood College, it's not a college in the American sense, and that's always tough for me when I'm talking about European schools and things. They've got forms instead of grades, I think. It's just very different, so I have to look these things up, but Collingwood College was actually a massive secondary school with a 6th form attached, meaning students from the ages of 11 to 18 all mixed on the same campus. And at first, Sharon did well. She was very popular with the staff and fellow students. She was described as being bright, really focused on her studies. She was polite, friendly, and helpful. She even played on the school's basketball team, and she acted as a form representative, which is basically a student student elected or chosen to represent their class in school matters. So understand, to be selected for this position, it would mean that Sharon would attend meetings with teachers and act as a spokesperson for her class to communicate student concerns. It would also mean that she had proven herself to be responsible, agreeable, and well behaved. But within a year, Sharon changed. She became disruptive and attention seeking. The vice principal stated that Sharon was, quote, charming and lively. A lot of staff liked her and found her refreshing. But then one or two teachers found her a little difficult, even aggressive. She was excluded on a number of occasions for aggressive behavior and once hit out at a member of staff who was on duty, end quote. So excluded is another term that I wasn't super familiar with, and it doesn't seem like when you say that a student was excluded, it's not like they're saying, oh, you can't take part in certain activities. I think it means expelled, like not allowed to come to school. So in 1992, social services was repeatedly contacted by staff at Sharon's school who were expressing their concerns about her behavior, which included abusing teachers, breaking desks, and showing an explosive temper. Once again, an overreaction to, things that maybe shouldn't cause so much aggression and anger. And because of her situation at home and her increasingly volatile actions at school, Sharon was sent to live with a foster family, Pat and Henry Aiken. Now, it looks like she lived with the Aikens intermittently for the next 2 years. The first time she was sent there was only for a month before she was sent back home, but she returned in August of 1992 and remained there for the next 18 months, although she would often spend a few days here and there at home, as well as with a friend, Natasha Hughes. And during this time, Sharon developed a reputation in the suburb of Old Dean. Reports state that the neighbors were actually afraid of 12-year-old Sharon. She was known to roam the neighborhood without parental supervision. It was understood and known that she carried around a satchel in which she kept knives, and she was generally seen as being very intimidating and unpredictable. Writing about Sharon, the Daily Telegraph said, quote, although only 12, Carr formed two separate sets of friends. Those of her own age knew her as a quiet girl, but she also mixed with a gang of youths aged from 17 to 20 who accepted the streetwise child. To those friends, she showed a cruel side. She told people she killed 2 dogs and showed them the bodies. She would sneak out of her room late at night to join the gang, which raced around Camberley in cars. She smoked and drank and boasted of carrying a knife and being prepared to use it. She was a tomboy, strong and aggressive. She got into fights, but was not thought of as a bully by other girls, more as someone who was well able to look after herself, end quote. Now, let's talk about the claims of animal cruelty, because according to Sharon herself, as well as those who knew her, she would attack and kill animals that lived near her home, including a claim she made that she had decapitated her next-door neighbor's dog with a garden spade. So there's not just one instance of Sharon hurting animals. It seemed that it was kind of a regular thing, and I read one newspaper report that said the neighbors, because this was often in her neighborhood, the neighbors would kind of notice, like, their animal turned up dead, like murdered in a very awful way, or their cats were missing. And everyone kind of suspected and in a way knew it was Sharon, but they were like too afraid to say anything to her about it. They were too afraid to call her out on it. And if they went to her mother, Maria, they would just be told like, oh, you're attacking my child. You're being unfair to my child. How dare you accuse her of this? She's always home safe. She's never out running the streets at night. Just pretty much denial. And even a police officer came forward and said, yeah, Sharon never had a criminal history. We did know she was out often at night running around with these gang of youths, which I don't even know how you can call them that if they're age 17 to 20. That's not really a gang of youths, right? It's a gang of adults. But the police officer said she was known to be doing this, and she was always seen by police officers on patrol out at night kind of running around, but she never got caught doing anything illegal. So she was never really on our radar. But yeah, the neighbors were afraid to kind of confront Sharon or her family about their animals, their pets, showing up dead or going missing. Now, some reports state that Sharon's mother, Maria, was a violent woman who subjected her children to brutal beatings and who taught Sharon how to practice voodoo by sacrificing animals. Now, I want to be very clear that I was only able to find these voodoo claims in one or two sources, one being like a 42-minute documentary on True Crime Central. And this allegation, along with some others we will talk about, likely came from Sharon herself. So I guess what I'm saying is, when it comes to finding reasons why Sharon wouldn't be, legally responsible for what she did, when it comes to digging into her background and trying to identify mitigating factors that would show she was programmed and indoctrinated with violence, making her less culpable, we do need to consider the source and understand that we may be dealing with not the most reliable of narrators. Now, I have no doubt that it's probably true that Sharon's mother, Maria, was unstable, emotionally all over the place, violent, not the best role model or mother for a young girl. Sure, yes, we do. We do know she poured boiling hot fat on top of her husband, not the action of a stable person. But we know that because it's backed up with police reports and evidence. So I wouldn't be so quick to believe that Maria was giving her very young daughter a masterclass on sacrificing animals. It's more likely that Sharon Carr was simply doing what so many other killers have done, using vulnerable animals to indulge in her early violent urges. Animal cruelty, as we know, is one of the strongest early predictors in violent offenders, and it's part of what criminologists call the MacDonald triad, along with fire setting and bedwetting. But even outside that framework, animal cruelty on its own is widely recognized as a hallmark behavior in serial killers, sadistic offenders, violent psychopaths, and juveniles who escalate into later violence. Harming animals, especially before puberty, it shows a lack of empathy. It shows that this person's getting pleasure from the suffering of another living thing, fascination with power and control, and also an impulse towards dominance over another living being. So there was a darkness in Sharon that no one could quite put their finger on, but it was felt by almost everyone who encountered her. A friend of Sharon's from school said, quote, "A lot of people were scared of her, and she used to hang around with boys most of the time," end quote. And as it turns out, these were older boys that Sharon was hanging out with. And Sharon may have preferred the company of boys, but she also seemed to have some romantic or sexual obsession with women, which we will see illustrated throughout her life in a pattern where she would become fixated on a woman, usually an older woman, and when she felt rejected or when she felt that her advances were being shut down, she would get angry and lash out. Now, in school, Sharon would be suspended multiple times for many different things, but one of those times that she was removed from school was because she became infatuated with one of her female teachers. And when that teacher was like, "Honey, I'm flattered, but obviously this is inappropriate," Sharon locked that teacher in a closet. So she obviously got suspended. By the summer of 1992, all the volatility simmering inside Sharon Carr had reached a dangerous boil. And in June of that year, it finally erupted, spilling out of her and onto an unsuspecting stranger named Katie Ratcliffe. Katie was 18 years old, an apprentice hairdresser who lived with her parents and younger sister in Camberley. Court correspondent Paul Cheston from the Evening Standard said that Katie was the antithesis of Sharon Carr in every way. She had a close and loving relationship with her family. She was bright and bubbly with tons of friends, and she had goals in life to get married, have children, and one day open a business of her own. Katie's parents said their daughter was a very happy girl, but she was a bit too trusting. And they would tell her they were worried about her and, they wanted her to be more careful and less trusting and open. And she'd often laugh and tell her mother and father that they worried too much. On the evening of June 6th, 1992, Katie Ratcliffe decided to go out with some friends to the Ragamuffins nightclub. So Katie and her boyfriend had broken up, and she was obviously upset about it. I guess she had tried to rekindle things with him, reunite with him, and he had rejected her and basically said, no, I'm moving on. And so she wanted to let loose that night. She wanted to be distracted from the heartbreak, hang out with her friends, have fun, which is exactly what she did. Now, it is believed that Katie was last seen around 2:30 in the morning, leaving that nightclub alone. 5 hours later, and 4 miles away, Katie's partially nude body would be found by some boys who'd been camping overnight. They were like Boy Scouts. I don't know what the UK equivalent of Boy Scouts is, but it seemed like they had an organized thing, and they were camping overnight, and then they packed up their camping gear, started heading home, and that's when they found her. They stumbled upon her around 7:30 a.m. near a cemetery in Farnborough, which, as I said, is over 4 miles away from where she had last been seen. Police at the time assumed that Katie's assailant must have been a violent male, most likely in his 30s, someone who had sadistic tendencies and showed echoes of Jack the Ripper. Law enforcement pursued this path of investigation because of the way Katie had been killed and the way her body had been treated. She'd been stabbed with a 6-inch blade between 27 and 32 times, and the attack had been so violent and aggressive that some of the knife strikes had actually penetrated straight through her body. Although there was no sign of sexual assault, some of her clothing had been removed, pulled up, things like that, and her genital area had been mutilated. So, of course, the police were going to assume that Katie's assailant was a man who was sexually motivated and also capable of physically moving her body from where she was last seen to where it was found. Now, I will call out the police anytime I need to for pursuing bad leads and having tunnel vision. I'll do that when it's appropriate. But based on what happened to Katie Ratcliffe, I have to admit there was no possible way anyone could have ever guessed that her killer was a 12-year-old girl. Or honestly, I don't think anybody could have even guessed that her killer was even an adult woman. And I'm not saying women aren't capable of killing, because we know that they are, but let's be honest with the facts, right? Men commit 90% of all homicides worldwide, and they're usually the ones killing for sexual gratification, domination, control, sadism, etc. Female killers, they do exist, but they tend to kill for reasons such as self-defense, financial gain, conflict with their intimate partners, jealousy, things like that. And female homicide is overwhelmingly relational, meaning the victim is someone they know. Where men often kill strangers, women very rarely do. And yes, we also know some children have committed murders. Luckily, that's definitely more rare, but it happens. We have examples of this throughout history. But I have to be honest with you, almost no examples exist of a child, let alone a female child, killing an adult stranger. I did find a case where 2 12-year-old boys in the UK were convicted of murdering a 19-year-old stranger. But once again, that's boys. There's 2 of them, so you got that kind of gang mentality there. And yeah, I don't know what their motive was for killing this person, but even that's a rarity. Even to see young boys, children, kill an adult stranger is very rare. In Sharon Carr's case, the convergence of age, gender, victim type, and motive makes it almost singular in criminal history. Clive Driscoll, a former detective with the Metropolitan Police, said, quote, "It was almost a Jack the Ripper sort of incident, and we know how we feel about how barbaric that was. But this was a situation where the lady's sex organs were attacked. Some of the injuries from the pathologists suggested she wasn't actually dead during the infliction of the genital injuries. One can only infer how this young girl might have thought at the start of the attack and how it must have carried on," end quote. So Katie Ratcliffe was not only stabbed multiple times, way more than would have been needed to kill her, but there was genital mutilation that was carried out on her while she was still alive. Detectives conducted a very thorough investigation, starting at the nightclub that Katie had been to that evening. They questioned people. They questioned people she knew, the people she'd been with that night, questioned people in the area to see if they'd seen anything. But they found no leads, and the case would eventually go cold. For the next 2 years, Sharon Carr continued on as if nothing had happened. She continued her same routine of engaging in bad behavior, terrorizing the neighbors and their pets, and getting in trouble at school. Throughout the spring of 1994, Sharon was expelled from school twice for being abusive to staff, and she was given a number of detentions for disruptive behavior and smoking. On June 7th, 1994, 2 years to the day of when Katie Ratcliffe was murdered, a now 14-year-old Sharon Carr randomly attacked another person, a fellow student, in a school bathroom. Now, that student was 13-year-old Anne Marie Clifford. And even though Sharon and Anne Marie attended the same school, they didn't really know each other. You know, you've gone to school before and you have your friends, and then you have people in your grade, and then people in your school, and you kind of know them by sight, and you're like, oh, I know that guy, I've seen him around, or I see this girl because her locker is in the same hallway as mine, or whatever, but you don't know them. Like, you just walk up and start talking to them. Sharon and Anne Marie, they weren't even in the same grade. They didn't hang out with the same people. They simply went to the same school. So that day, as students were making their way through the halls from one class to another, Sharon told Anne Marie that she'd lost some money in the bathroom and she needed her help to find it. Now, it's never really stated how did Sharon choose Anne Marie as a victim. In my opinion, I think Anne Marie just happened to be passing by the bathroom at that time, wrong place. And Sharon was like, hey, can you help me? You know, I lost some money. I need your help finding it. So Anne Marie followed Sharon into the bathroom, and she immediately spotted a coin on the floor. But when she bent down to pick it up, Sharon plunged a knife with a 4-inch blade into her back. The blade punctured Anne Marie's lung. It just barely missed her heart. And luckily, moments later, because remember this is between classes, and now the bell's ringing to notify the students that they need to be in their next class. So there's students in the hallway and stuff like that. So moments after the stabbing, 5 students entered the bathroom, and this caused Sharon to make her getaway, running for the exit of the bathroom. And then these students found Anne Marie sitting on a toilet, unable to speak, and covered in blood. Now, luckily, Anne Marie survived, but the randomness and cruelty of the attack shocked everyone. Many students were aware of Sharon. Many of them were afraid of her and kept their distance, but no one saw that coming, right? It's like, you know, she's maybe not a good kid and she's got some issues and some trouble controlling herself, but you randomly just stab somebody in school. You know, getting into trouble at school and acting like a tough kid was one thing. Waking up one day and deciding to stab someone else that goes to your school during school in broad daylight between classes when there's people all around, that's completely another thing altogether. So a girl who was friendly with Sharon at school said, quote, she stabbed Anne Marie after a history lesson. We heard what had happened and some people saw Sharon running off. Later, she came back to school and was talking to people at the gates about what happened. The police then arrested her. She told me she always carried a knife for protection, particularly because she was often kept behind at school and had to walk home on her own in the dark, end quote. I call bullshit on this. Sharon, as you'll find, is extremely manipulative. She tells people the truth about things because she wants to. She wants to revel in her dark deeds. But she also kind of says things that make her seem less culpable or less bad. Like, I know Sharon is not worried about walking home from school alone because she's sneaking out of her house at night and running the streets with her, like, adult friends. And she's carrying a knife then when she's running the streets. So I just think that, you know, she's trying to make it seem like I'm more vulnerable than I appear. I'm actually just a scared little girl. And it's kind of creepy because as we learn more about Sharon, you'll realize that she was anything but a scared little girl. And it kind of reminds me of the black-eyed kids that we talked about last Halloween, I think, or maybe a few Halloweens ago, but how these kids, which weren't kids at all, they were like demonic entities, they would appear as children so that the adults around them would let their guard down, and then the demonic children would then attack, right? So I think Sharon was actually physically a child and looked like a child, but she used that to make people think that she wasn't as much of a danger as she actually was. So Sharon was obviously taken into custody by the police, and when questioned, she proudly told them that, yeah, she'd stabbed Anne Marie, and she told them she also took a lot of pleasure in stabbing cats. And, she said, hey, I once decapitated a dog with a spade, and that was awesome. She was really enjoying telling the police these things that she had done, not just to Anne Marie, but about how, she regularly did this to her neighbors' pets and animals. After the attempted murder of her schoolmate, Sharon was transferred to Middlesex Lodge Assessment Center in Hayes. So, this is a locked observation and assessment unit for children who no longer fit into ordinary care or school systems. And there, the system would have treated her less like a misbehaved teenager and more like a young offender under serious evaluation. The fact that she was sent there, it was a sign that the violence bubbling inside her had already drawn the full attention of the state, and they didn't even know about Katie Ratcliffe yet. Now, it seems the purpose of having Sharon go to this center instead of being incarcerated was due to an attempt of finding out what was going on with her. Could she be rehabilitated? Could she be straightened out and put on a better path, due to her very young age? She's 12. Nobody's thinking this 12-year-old girl, yeah, she stabbed somebody at her school, but nobody's immediately thinking she's a psychopath. She's done this before. She'll do it again. She actually really enjoys it. No, they were thinking something must have happened. There must be a reason for this. And hopefully we can figure out what's going on inside Sharon's head, and we can help her get better, and she can return to normal society and live a normal life. However, while she was at Middlesex, Sharon attacked and tried to strangle 2 staff members. So she's not getting better, right? She's not even able to pretend for a short period that she doesn't want to kill everyone around her. Eventually, Sharon was sentenced to 4 years in a secure unit at Bullwood Hall in Essex, a young offenders institution for female adolescents. Now, Sharon was scheduled to be released in 1998, and if she had kept her head down, if she had done her time, if she just, been chill, she would have been out by the age of 18, allowed to live her life and put her horrible past and mistakes behind her. Luckily, though, for everyone on the outside walking around, Sharon could not do that. She was only there for about 2 years before she started talking about Katie Ratcliffe's murder. Now, you should also know that Sharon Carr had a habit of writing things down in a diary of sorts. She'd done this before being arrested, and she continued to do it after her incarceration. On January 13th, 1996, Sharon wrote in her diary, quote, "Remember KR? Oh God, did she get me going? So hot. Pity, really. I think about it and my head is spinning, but against the cops, I'm winning." End quote. Obviously, KR stands for Katie Ratcliffe. Now, I know so many of us in the true crime community see KR. We think Karen Reed. No. Sharon's not talking about Karen Reed. She's talking about Katie Ratcliffe. On January 20th, another entry read, quote, "This year must tell about KR." End quote. Sharon wrote a lot of other things as well, and we're going to get to that. But what's important here is that she was itching to tell someone about what she had done, the murder she had committed, gotten away with, and reveled in over the years. At the end of January, Sharon wrote in her diary, quote, "Thought about KR a lot today. Soon I will trust someone to tell them what happened." End quote. And she found the person that she thought she could trust in Annette Seeney, a female prison officer that Sharon had become infatuated and obsessed with. So Sharon told Annette that she had killed Katie Ratcliffe. Sharon claimed that she and 2 boys had picked Katie up, and then Sharon, had stabbed Katie in their car. And Sharon smiled as she talked to Annette about stabbing Katie over and over again. And she told Annette how she had felt powerful doing it. Now, this is one of the most fascinating and most telling parts of Sharon Carr's psychology, because on the surface, it makes no sense. At this point, yeah, she's got to serve a few years in this, reformatory kind of place. But in Katie's murder, she was in the clear. Nobody knew what happened to Katie. They weren't even looking in the right places. On top of that, she was a child. Sharon was a child. They had no forensic evidence connecting her to Katie's murder. And if she had just shut her mouth, she would have walked out at the age of 18 with a clean slate. So why confess? Why risk everything? Now, the truth is, this is classic predatory sadistic psychology because the secret itself was the high, not the concealment of that secret. Sadistic offenders often describe the killing, the fantasy, the memory of the power, and the retelling of all of that as a kind of fuel. With Sharon Carr, the murder wasn't a one-time act. It became her identity, her power source, her origin story, the thing that would give her dopamine, make her feel good and happy. Keeping it to herself for as long as she had already felt frustrating. Continuing to keep it inside was becoming impossible. As you can see from her diary entries, she's like, I gotta tell somebody, I'm about to burst, I gotta get this out. Now, Sharon needed Katie's murder to stay alive in her mind, and the only way to maintain that intensity was to externalize it, first by writing about it in her diary, and then talking about it to other people. Serial and sadistic killers frequently need validation, recognition, and the adrenaline of an audience, a witness to their power. The trusted person Sharon fantasized about telling had nothing to do with actual trust. It was about having someone see her, fear her, and admire her power and her competency in killing. Killer psychology has already shown us that the fantasy isn't complete until someone else knows. And so Sharon wasn't confessing out of guilt or trying to get it off her chest. She was performing a one-woman show and probably just absolutely relishing the look of shock and horror and disbelief on Annette Seeney's face. Now, of course, Annette Seeney immediately notified police, and they didn't initially believe Sharon Carr's story. They didn't believe anything Sharon Carr was saying. Now, we've already talked about the type of person that law enforcement believed committed Katie Ratcliffe's murder, and they honestly scoffed at the idea that a 12-year-old girl would be physically or emotionally capable of doing such a thing. But detectives traveled to Ballwood Hall anyway because they thought, maybe Sharon knew something about the murder, that she hadn't done it, but maybe she knew about the people who had. She might just be confessing to get attention or get clout with her fellow prisoners. Maybe she was just bored or unruly and she wanted to kind of cause chaos that day. But it was possible she did know some information about what happened to Katie Ratcliffe. So they went there, they sat her down and interviewed her, and they started talking to Sharon. And the more they talked to her, the more they realized they were dealing with something they had never encountered before and hoped to never encounter again. Detective Sergeant Paul Clements, who interviewed Sharon Carr extensively, said, quote, "It's almost as if she was in another world. What sticks in my mind about talking to her was the coldness. Most people that you interview show some feeling as to why they have done what they have done, but with her there was a complete absence of emotion and reason." End quote. Sharon's cell was searched, with police finding her prison diary. Detectives went to her home where they recovered her pre-prison diary, and both diaries were filled with some of the most chilling things I have ever personally seen or read, especially knowing that the person whose brain these things came from was a literal child. She had made entries in the months after killing Katie Ratcliffe, saying, quote, "Oh, damn, I've got a taste for red rum, and God, I want to get drunk," end quote. Another entry said, quote, "Nasty thoughts throughout the night. Pure jealousy makes me want to fight," end quote. And yet another entry stated, quote, "I swear I was born to be a murderer. Killing for me is a mass turn on, and it just makes me so high, I never want to come down," end quote. And then, as I said, Sharon kept writing in a diary after being locked up, continuously making entries throughout 1994, 1995, and 1996. Like, quote, "I wish I could kill you again. I promise I would make you suffer more, you slag. Your terrified screams turn me on," end quote. Another entry, quote, "Did she deserve death or not? Maybe not, but it's too late now," End quote. And yet another entry, quote, I believe in pain as the mirror of the extreme perfection of man's ability, the sublimation of the ego, the resurrection of the animal, the supreme animal. That's why she had to be killed. End quote. Now, to me, this last entry that I read to you is particularly revealing, not because it makes logical sense, but because it exposes the internal mythology that I believe Sharon had built around her violence, her power, her identity. It reads like a mixture of immature philosophizing, stolen ideas, and also genuine sadistic fantasy, which is exactly the kind of thing I think you'd expect to see in young offenders with emerging psychopathic traits. Sharon was doing what many sadistic offenders do. She was building a worldview where violence equaled purity, power, truth, transcendence. We've seen this kind of bullshit from people like Chris Watts, Charles Manson, Brian Laundrie, Dennis Rader, Israel Keys, Ted Bundy. The list goes on and on. It really does. They always do this as a way to justify what they want to do, what they have done, what they're going to do again. At first glance, the ramblings of these self-aggrandizing killers may seem poetic and raw. I've heard people say like, oh, Sharon Carr was such a good writer. You could tell she was so deep. No, I disagree. You can tell, in my opinion, the things that she was writing were actually just a desperate attempt to sound deep, to sound smart, to sound more dangerous, using big abstract words, mimicking concepts she barely understood, dressing her impulses in philosophy, phrases like the resurrection of the animal, the supreme animal, right? That's Sharon seeing herself as primal, powerful, above normal morality, and beyond the constraints of society. And many psychopaths build this exact narrative, the belief that they are more alive and more authentic when they inflict pain. Or, if everybody was as evolved as me, then everybody would be doing this. But underneath the word salad is a simple truth. Sharon killed because she wanted to feel powerful, and she attempted to elevate that into a worldview. But underneath the word salad is a simple truth. Sharon killed because she wanted to. She liked it. She wanted to feel powerful. She wanted to feel above others. And she attempted to elevate that very, obviously messed up, but also, unevolved and just really dangerous sort of mindset into a worldview. In March of 1995, Sharon wrote, quote, I bet she's all bone and maggots by now. She shouldn't have tested me. End quote. In July of 1995, Sharon wrote, quote, death by knife wounds and sex go together. They both take you, and all women should be taken. End quote. In November of 1995, she wrote, quote, last night it occurred to me that killing her did me good. I know what I am capable of and will do it again. End quote. That same month, another entry said, quote, 2.5 years ago today, I put that slag in the ground. Keep smiling. End quote. In April of 1996, a month before she would be charged with Katie's murder, Sharon wrote, quote, I'm not like one of those pretty girls who breaks down due to a guilty conscience. Through 6.5 years of causing people grief, I still have not found one. End quote. I don't know if she's saying she hasn't found a pretty girl who feels guilt, or if she hasn't found guilt. Either way, it didn't make much sense. I think she means I'm not like the pretty girls who have a conscience and feel guilt. Oh, I think I get it now. I think she means I still haven't found one, as in a conscience. She still hasn't found a conscience. All right. So she has no conscience. She's saying this to our faces, and she means it, right? We're going to talk about that. She absolutely means it, and I'm sure she felt that way. And I genuinely believe that whatever we know as the human conscience, Sharon Carr did not have it. On June 6th of 1996, Sharon wrote, quote, respect to Katie Ratcliffe, 4 years today, end quote. So she's not using KR anymore when she talks about Katie Ratcliffe in her diary because she's already been arrested for Katie's murder, and she's already, in jail. And so she doesn't have to hide it anymore, which actually is going to make her very happy. She can just write and say Katie's name out loud. Also in 1996, we have a very detailed and disturbing entry. Quote, I bring the knife into her chest. Her eyes are closing. She is pleading with me, so I bring the knife to her again and again. I don't want to hurt her, but I need to do violence to her. I need to overcome her beauty, her serenity, her security. There I see her face when she died. I know she feels her life being slowly drawn from her, and I hear her gasp. I guess she was trying to breathe. The air stops in the back of her throat. I know all her life breathing has worked, but it does not now, and I am joyful. I enjoyed putting the blade up her. It made me feel powerful. End quote. So obviously in this entry, Sharon is describing and reliving the murder of Katie Ratcliffe. But that's not all, because Sharon also talked about Katie and her murder in letters to friends and family. Don't ask me who these people were. People who were still staying in contact with this girl and accepting letters like this from her. They have not been identified, and it's probably better that way. In one letter, Sharon said, quote, every night I see the devil in my dreams, sometimes even in my mirror, but I realize it was just me and my heart of terror, end quote. So deep, Sharon, so deep. In another, she said, quote, when I am attacking someone, their eyes glaze. It is a turn on you have to try. I know some people may think it is sick, but believe me, you might as well feel the pleasure before the pain because the pain lasts longer, end quote. Ugh. So just such an attempt to sound like, oh, I'm an all-knowing being, like encouraging your friend, like, you need to try this. You need to try this, dude. What? It's like, oh, I went to this new bubble tea place. You really need to try this. No, Sharon's like, you need to try killing someone and watching their eyes glaze over because it is chef's kiss. In yet another letter to a friend, Sharon wrote, quote, they should be pleased I had the decency to take her from this awful world of nightmares and fears, end quote. Yeah, how many times have we heard that from killers, especially, adult killers, parents who kill their own children, and then they're like, well, I was saving them from this terrible, terrible world. Okay, dude. So after detectives seized Sharon Carr's writings, they questioned her for 27 hours, and during that time, she did confess, but she also gave multiple accounts of what had happened during Katie's murder. Sharon claimed she was with two boys in a car at the time of the attack, and that the boys had sexually assaulted Katie before Sharon killed her, and then the boys helped Sharon dump the body. We obviously know part of that isn't true because Katie had not been sexually assaulted, just the genital mutilation, which, yes, I suppose, that would be a form of sexual assault for sure. But in the way that Sharon was explaining it was that there had been, a sexual assault, like an actual sexual assault by these boys onto Katie, if you understand what I mean. In yet another account, Sharon said that she had killed Katie inside the boy's car, but in another version, she claimed she had attacked Katie and killed her outside the vehicle. Sharon also told the police that her motive for killing Katie had been because the two boys that she'd been with had picked Katie up at a bus stop, and Sharon was jealous of the attention they were giving Katie, which I also don't believe that because as we know, and as we're going to come to see more, Sharon really didn't care about attention like that from boys. Now, Sharon did give the police the names of the two boys she claimed she had been with, Michael Draper and Scott Champion, but when police questioned them, it was discovered that they both had alibis and they were eliminated as suspects. These boys, I don't know how old they were, so I keep saying boys because that's how they're described. I don't know what their ages were, but these two boys/young men were not only questioned extensively, but the cars they used were forensically checked. There was no sign of blood or traces of blood or any sign that Katie Ratcliffe had ever been in either vehicle. Detective Chief Inspector James announced, quote, there is no evidence that they were involved beyond what Carr told us. We will be committed to pursuing other lines of inquiry, end quote. Now, this doesn't mean that the police didn't believe that Sharon had an accomplice or two, because they certainly did. They certainly believed that Sharon had not murdered Katie and then disposed of her body alone. They believed that Sharon had committed the murder alone, but not the movement of Katie from the place where she was last seen to the place where her body was found. The police and later the prosecution, they were convinced that Sharon could not have done this on her own because she would have needed access to a car that would allow her to transport Katie, who weighed 120 pounds, 4 miles from where she was last seen. I personally do question whether or not Sharon had accomplices, because I honestly see a world in which she committed the murder on her own. She's not this trusting person that's going to put herself in a position where anybody knows what she did until she's ready for them to know what she did. So let's say that Sharon had come across Katie near where Katie was last seen. And in that scenario, Sharon could have pretended to be a scared little girl who got lost, who needed help getting home or getting somewhere safe. With Sharon being just 12 years old, Katie would have wanted to do anything, right? She would have wanted to do anything to help. She would not have sensed a threat, and she may have offered to help get Sharon home. Maybe they walked together, a trip that would have only taken about an hour and a half. And then when they were at the place where Katie's body would later be found, Sharon stabbed her there. Maybe they even took a bus to a location closer to that spot and walked a short distance the rest of the way. If Katie was at a bus stop, as Sharon claimed, that could be possible. Sharon could have told Katie, oh, my house is over here, where Katie's body would be found. And so Katie would have, been willing to walk her there, or even, found a way to get her there, whether a bus or some other way. And then I think Sharon could have committed the crime all on her own. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, because if the two boys that Sharon named were cleared and the police knew that Sharon hung out with a gang of youths, age 17 to 20, then the police also would have been aware, either just from having knowledge of this or from talking to people Sharon knew, like her family and friends, who these 17 to 20-year-olds were, and the police would have questioned them and tried to get their alibis for that night and checked their vehicles and things like that. And if it was no one that Sharon was hanging out with on a regular basis and it wasn't the two people that she named, then who would it have been? Someone like Sharon Carr would have wanted to take full accountability for the murder, yes, but she had no problem naming two accomplices who, as it turns out, the police don't believe were involved at all. So why would she have not given the actual names of her actual accomplices, knowing she was going to go to prison anyways? It doesn't make sense, especially when she's often trying to make herself seem less culpable for these things. Now, it seems that Sharon's mother, Maria, initially tried to deny that her daughter had been involved with the murder of Katie Ratcliffe, just like she tried to deny that her daughter was out there assassinating the neighborhood pets. Maria claimed that Sharon had been home at the time of the attack, but later during Sharon's trial, her mother did not testify in court on her behalf. She did not present this evidence in court, which is probably because it wasn't true, right? It's well known that Sharon snuck out of her house all the time at night. She would go out of her bedroom window. She was always seen running the streets late. And so it's possible that Sharon may have been home and in her room when her mother went to bed, but she obviously did not stay there. And I don't know if Maria genuinely believed that her daughter was not guilty of this, or if she was just trying to protect her and get her off the hook. I think the latter. But that's just my opinion. So Sharon Carr was arrested in May, and after getting a lawyer, she immediately withdrew her confession. But even Carr's legal team described the girl as being difficult to deal with, calling her frustrating, and noting that she could be manipulative. A statement from one of her lawyers claimed, quote, "From the offset, what she was saying didn't make much sense. It was full of inconsistencies and inaccuracies, and in the end, I didn't know what to believe," end quote. A reconstruction of Katie Ratcliffe's murder was also done and videotaped so that Sharon could show police how she had done the murder, and Sharon happily acted out the stabbing of her victim, and she would laugh when she was asked specific questions about the attack. She really enjoyed doing this reconstruction. Of course, it's like a serial killer being able to spend time with one of their trophies or relive this, awesome moment for them when they committed a crime, but once again, they get to do it for an audience, which is secretly, I think, what every serial killer wants to do. Now, while awaiting her trial, Sharon was sent to Bullwood Hall Prison, where she continued her reign of terror, according to fellow inmate, 17-year-old Katie White, who spent 3 months with Sharon behind bars. Katie said Sharon had become obsessed with her and started stalking her, all because Katie had told Sharon her first name, which apparently was an invitation for Sharon to dive into another infatuation ritual. Katie White said, quote, "Sharon told me she was like Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs, and that I was her Jodie Foster. She tried to get inside my mind as well as my body like Lecter did. She would come up and whisper in my ear as she grabbed my breast that she could smell my blood or smell my fear. And she was dead right. Wherever I went, she was there, smiling and licking her lips. She had a huge file and wrote murder hundreds of times. She also wrote on the folder, I am a killer, killing is my business, and business is good. She was one very mixed up girl." End quote. A very mixed up girl. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the understatement of the century. Katie's like, she tried to get inside my head and my body like Hannibal Lecter. And she was telling me she could smell my fear. She's a really mixed up girl. Yeah, I would say she is. So during her trial, Sharon would listen to the details of her crimes stoically without blinking. Occasionally, she would flash a smile or let out a laugh. Maybe her lawyers had told Sharon that she had a chance of being found not guilty. After all, there was technically no forensic evidence tying her to Katie's murder, and she was just 12 years old when it happened. But Sharon did have knowledge of the murder that had not been made publicly available. To the police, Sharon had graphically described what she had done to Katie, including one particularly gruesome detail that the police had intentionally withheld from the papers. Additionally, she told the detectives that she had stolen Katie's bracelet, and in fact, Katie's bracelet that she always wore was missing, another detail that had not been shared with the public. And of course, there was Sharon's diary, the things she had written before and after Katie's murder. Her own words were damning, and it only took 5 hours for the jury of 5 women and 7 men to find her guilty. Apparently, this was a real shock to Sharon as she listened to the verdict read in disbelief before slumping down in her chair and putting her head in her hands. Now, before sentencing, Justice Scott Baker told Sharon Carr that he still believed she'd been with other people the night of Katie's murder. He said, quote, "The evidence suggests you were not alone when you stabbed Katie Ratcliffe to death in June 1992. Who the others were and any part they played remains unclear. What is clear is that you had a sexual motive for this killing, and it is apparent both from the brutal manner in which you mutilated her body and chilling entries in your diary recording what you had done. That killing, as you put it, turns you on. You are, in my view, an extremely dangerous young woman." End quote. Sharon Carr was sentenced in 1997 to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years, but even after that 14 years, she remained in prison because she was deemed too dangerous to be released. So Sharon Carr was psychologically examined multiple times, and although her exact condition could never be pinpointed, the consensus has been surprisingly consistent across psychiatrists, psychologists, and mental health professionals. Reportedly, Sharon Carr was not mentally ill in the legal sense. She did not suffer from psychosis, she did not have schizophrenia, she did not experience delusions or hallucinations. This is critical because it meant that Sharon clearly understood the difference between right and wrong, and therefore she was fully responsible for her actions. The formal psychiatric opinion during Sharon's trial and evaluations was that she suffered from a personality disorder and psychopathic traits. Multiple forensic assessments concluded that Sharon displayed long-standing antisocial traits, including aggression, cruelty to animals, deceitfulness, lack of remorse, impulsivity, a disregard for the rules, and repeated acts of violence. Later evaluations, especially during her future parole hearings and reviews, they noted borderline personality disorder traits on top of antisocial personality disorder traits. And these included unstable relationships, intense and obsessive attachments towards female prisoners, and extreme emotional reactions when rejected. That included impulsive aggression and threats of self-harm. Additionally, psychiatrists consistently described Sharon as having psychopathic traits that indicated emerging psychopathy. She was manipulative, sexually sadistic, thrill-seeking, emotionally cold, predatory, fascinated by violence, excited by suffering, and she relished in the memory of killing. Professor Gordon Trassler, one of the UK's most respected criminal psychologists who had spent 40 years analyzing the criminal mind, described Sharon Carr as a unique case, saying, quote, "I have found it very difficult to find precedents. There have been children who have killed other children, Mary Bell and the two boys who killed Jamie Bulger, for example, but in this case, here is a child who killed somebody who was almost an adult. I think at the moment Carr is extremely dangerous, perhaps as dangerous a person as one could identify. She was clearly prepared to kill without an adequate motive, and that makes her conduct very unpredictable." End quote. Yeah, so he said Sharon Carr is perhaps the most dangerous of people that you could identify. And we're going to talk about that. So in 2003, when Sharon Carr was 23, her defense team attempted to challenge both her murder conviction and the 14-year minimum sentence. They argued that her conviction should be reduced to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility and that her minimum term should be reduced to 9 years. So this is when the court heard that Sharon, who at that time was an inmate at Broadmoor, I believe, she had continued assaulting other inmates as well as staff after her trial, and she also made statements that she wanted to kill a fellow inmate by slitting her throat. Additionally, it was reported that at times Sharon believed she was a lizard, and she had tried to cut herself in order to find out whether or not she was still human. I once again call bullshit on this. I think at this point, Sharon's like, I got to get out of here. They've analyzed me, mentally, and they have decided I'm not mentally ill, which means you can't have a diminished responsibility sort of defense. I have a personality disorder, and I need to kind of make it seem like I am mentally ill. Like I need to make it seem like I am having hallucinations or, I'm seeing things that aren't there. So she's like, I'm going to walk around and pretend I think I'm a lizard and cut myself to prove that I'm still human. I think it was an act. I think it was all an act. So Sharon's requests were denied, both of them. The court stated that nothing the defense team said had been convincing enough to change her current status. It was also pointed out that even after 14 years, there was still going to be no guarantee that Sharon would be released. She would only win her freedom when it was proven that she no longer posed a threat to society. Over the years, Sharon continued to act out behind bars. She was moved around to a lot of different high-security hospitals and prisons, and she was given the designation of a restricted status prisoner in 2015. Now, this is huge because this means that Sharon Carr was considered someone who, even if she were to escape for just a few minutes, would pose a constant and credible danger to the public. She was too violent and unpredictable to be held in lower security facilities, and she required the highest level of physical security and supervision. This status also meant that Sharon was someone whose escape must be prevented at all costs, and she was a prisoner whose behavior and risk did not decrease with time, as ongoing risk assessments showed ongoing violence, ongoing fantasies of violence, and ongoing plans for violence. This is the harshest custodial designation that the UK has for women, and there are only a handful of women who have been given this status. So on December 3rd, 2018, Sharon was moved to another facility, but she had to be transferred again following another violent incident in 2019. And understand how hard this would have been for Sharon to achieve, because her restricted prisoner status meant that she would not have been allowed to mix with the general prison population. She would have spent long periods of time in isolation due to the threat that she posed to others. She would have needed to pass very strict security checks to do anything, to attend any prison program, to attend any medical appointment, And wherever she would go in the prison, whether it was, transferring her from one place to another or transferring her to another facility, she would be escorted at all times by multiple guards. So it would have been tough for Sharon to find the time and opportunity to attack people. And it kind of seemed like she probably just took any chance she could get. So she's being walked down the hall to go to see a nurse or something. And another prisoner happens to be walking in the other direction. Even though Sharon's got 4 guards on her, she's going to lunge at that other prisoner and try to hurt that other prisoner just because she has this intense need to commit violent acts on others. It's really scary. In 2019, Sharon's lawyers attempted to get her restricted status downgraded, and that was flatly refused. And reading the judgment, it's not hard to see why. The judgment says that following Sharon's arrest, she was initially held in various psychiatric units and ICLEF Security Center, where she continued to regularly seriously assault other females, including trying to strangle 2 nurses. She was transferred to ICLEF's all-boy unit and then to HMP Bullwood Hall in September of 1995, where her aggressive and sexualized behavior could be better managed. Following her murder conviction, Sharon was held in HMP Harlowe before being transferred to Broadmoor Hospital in June of 1998, then to Rampton Hospital in 2007, and the medium security unit in Orchard in 2008. She had to be returned to Bronzefield in February of 2015 as she was presenting a risk to patients and staff, and at that time it was decided that she no longer required hospital treatment for a mental disorder because no effective treatment could be given to her. Nothing was working. So for those of you who are like, oh my God, this poor girl, just 12 when she committed this murder and just 14 when she was kind of locked up and arrested, they tried, okay? They tried to put her into the mental health system for several years after being found guilty of Katie's murder. Sharon was in mental hospitals for rehabilitation, so that she could get out after the 14 years. But it just didn't work. Even in those places, she continued attacking people and being violent and trying to hurt people. So they tried, but at that point, it's what can we do here? If we keep letting her go into these hospital and psychiatric units, she's going to keep attacking people and trying to hurt people. And these are people we're also responsible for. So we have to put this girl into a maximum security prison and keep her isolated, kind of like Hannibal Lecter. She was right. She was right. They have to keep her isolated. So that was when she was given restricted prisoner status, right? Because they were like, she can't go in the mental hospitals. She's too dangerous. Even in a regular prison, she's too dangerous to mix with the general population. We have to give her this restricted prisoner status. We have to keep her away from Gen Pop as much as possible. And then in December of 2018, Sharon was moved to HMP Low Newton, but had to be moved back to Bronzefield after a violent attack with another prisoner in August of 2019. Sharon's lawyers claimed that she'd been diagnosed with schizoaffective, emotionally unstable personality disorder, and that she was only acting out because she'd been prescribed antipsychotic medication, and then she wouldn't take her medication. So that's when she was acting out and stuff. But once again, I call a little bit of bullshit here because, first of all, if you're in prison or you're in a psychiatric center, it shouldn't be a choice as to whether you're taking this antipsychotic medication. It should be administered to you, or somebody should be standing there watching you take it and then have you open your mouth to make sure that you didn't try to hide it under your tongue or in your cheek. That's very important, obviously. I don't think that Sharon needed antipsychotic medication. Antipsychotic meds are typically given to someone who is experiencing psychosis, like a break with reality, hallucinations, things like that. And when Sharon was analyzed and when she had psychological assessments during her early imprisonment and her trial, it was already decided, no, she doesn't have schizophrenia. She's not hearing things. She's not seeing things. Sharon was a little too honest at first, right? She was just happy to have people to talk to. And they were like, are you hearing things? Are you seeing things? She's like, no, I'm not. This is just me. This is all me. And then when she's been in prison and in and out of these mental facilities for a few years, I think Sharon probably was like, I should have pretended I have hallucinations. And so then she started doing the lizard thing. And then maybe she was given antipsychotic medication. But even if she did take it, it wouldn't have done anything because she wasn't having actual hallucinations or delusions. She wasn't going through psychosis. She didn't, have a break from reality. So, like I said, her attempts at that point to, reduce her sentence or have her status, her prisoner status, downgraded. This was denied. In 2020, Sharon appealed that 2019 decision, but this was also denied on the grounds that she had still not provided significant evidence that she was a reduced risk to other people. In 2022, when she was 42 years old, Sharon Carr applied for full release or a move to an open prison, like a minimum security prison, and a parole board hearing was scheduled. Her appeal was denied because it was decided she still posed a risk to the public. I mean, she still posed a risk to the people who were forced to be imprisoned with her too, so I don't think that decision was much of a surprise to anyone, except maybe Sharon, because she was unable to lie and manipulate her way out of this. As of today, Sharon Carr is still behind bars, and thankfully, I don't see that changing anytime soon because there's no hope of rehabilitation for this person. Sharon Carr's case stands out, not just because she was young, not just because she was female, but because she violated every pattern that criminologists use to understand violent offenders. Even among professionals who work with dangerous people every day, Sharon is considered an anomaly, someone whose behavior can't easily be explained by trauma, impulse, immaturity, or the developmental chaos that usually underlies juvenile crime. Most children who kill do so in moments of emotional collapse or confusion. Their violence is reactive, rooted in fear, rage, or an inability to regulate overwhelming feelings. Sharon was different. At just 12 years old, she killed an adult the way that an adult male sexual sadist kills. She killed a stranger. She killed an adult. She attacked this person with frenzied overkill and mutilation driven by a desire for domination, power, and sexual excitement. That combination, age, gender, victim choice, and sadism, is almost unheard of in the history of female homicide and virtually non-existent among children. I really couldn't find another case. Even more troubling is what happened after. Most young offenders stabilize as they grow. They mature. Their brains develop. They develop empathy. Their risk decreases. Sharon moved in the opposite direction. As she aged, her violence became more calculated, her fantasies more explicit, her attachments more obsessive and volatile. She assaulted inmates and staff. She threatened to kill again. She wrote about murder with sexual arousal and pride. Nothing about her psychological development suggested rehabilitation, remorse, or emotional growth. And this is why every attempt she's made to challenge her sentence or reduce her security status has been denied. Not because of what she did as a 12-year-old child, but because of who she continued to be as an adult. Forensic psychologists describe her as unique, unpredictable, and extremely dangerous, someone whose risk doesn't decline with age but hardens into something more fixed and more alarming. In a system that generally believes children can be rehabilitated, Sharon Carr is the rare exception, an almost singular case where age offered no protection, no mitigation, and no hope that time would soften what was already present inside her. She doesn't just break the mold, she exists outside of it entirely. Sharon had made many claims to the police. She said she'd been sexually assaulted at the age of 9. But when asked for clarification, not even just by the police, but by mental health professionals, such as the who, the what, the where, the why, who did this to you, where did it happen, what was their relationship to you, things like that, she refused to give any further details. And yes, no doubt, she probably did have a chaotic and traumatic upbringing. She was certainly witness to plenty of emotional upheaval, dysregulation, violence, but trauma alone does not create a killer. Sadly, millions of children worldwide experience abuse, neglect, domestic violence, parental mental illness, and poverty, but a vast minority of them become violent offenders, and even fewer become sadistic killers. Trauma is a risk factor, not a destiny. And many abused children, they do end up growing into compassionate adults precisely because they understand pain and they don't want other people to feel it, right? This is where that conscience comes in that Sharon said she's missing. This is where empathy comes in. This is where humanity comes in. And this is also where science comes in. Because research on children who develop severe aggression or callous unemotional traits, that research shows that sadistic offenders tend to have innate neurological or temperamental differences. So it's not just how they were raised or what they saw. They're born different. They're born not the way that would be conducive to human compassion, to human feeling. So the amygdala is the part of the brain that processes fear, empathy, danger cues, emotional learning. And in children with early psychopathic traits, the amygdala is noticeably smaller in size. It's less active when viewing fear or distress in others and less reactive to punishment or threat. This means that they don't feel fear normally. They don't respond normally to the fear of others. They don't learn from punishment, and they don't emotionally encode consequences. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is responsible for decision-making, impulse control, moral reasoning, regulating aggression. And in sadistic or psychopathic children, researchers find reduced gray matter. They also find weaker connections to the limbic system and impaired inhibition. So gray matter is actually made up of neuron cell bodies, dendrites, synapses, glial cells. So reduced gray brain matter means fewer neuronal cell bodies to do the emotional and cognitive work. It also means fewer or weaker connections between brain regions and brain regions that are physically smaller or less developed. Essentially, if the brain was a car, that car is driving around with a compromised brake system and no fear of what happens when you can't stop the car. And when you combine a weak prefrontal cortex with a low reacting amygdala, you get a child who doesn't feel fear, doesn't anticipate or care about consequences, doesn't have empathy, and doesn't try to stop themselves. Luckily, this combination is extremely rare, but when it does happen, it's obviously very dangerous. Brain scans also show that children who exhibit callous unemotional traits have hyperactive reward circuits in areas of the brain that activate strongly in response to risky behavior, aggressive acts, rule breaking, as well as dominance over others. So that means that to these individuals, aggression feels good, violence feels exciting, danger feels rewarding, and this is where sadism takes root. Children like Sharon also show emotional blunting, a clinical term that means a person's external and internal emotional responses are significantly reduced or muted. Emotional blunting is a neurological reduction of emotion, not feeling fear the way other people do, not reacting to distress, and not experiencing guilt on any meaningful level. On brain scans, you can actually see it. The amygdala doesn't light up the way it should. The prefrontal cortex stays quiet, and the pathways that connect emotion to decision-making barely activate. In assessments, these children seem calm when others are upset. They don't learn from punishment, and their emotional responses are shallow or scripted, aka manipulative. It's one of the strongest indicators we have that someone's empathy system simply isn't operating the way it should, that emotional blunting. Now remember, when Sharon's mother threw that boiling fat on her stepfather, and the stepfather said, yeah, that boiling fat sure hurt. But the thing I was most shocked about was how a very young Sharon just stood there and watched this happen with no emotion and no facial expression. That's a flat affect. That's emotional blunting. A child like this will not react to others' pain. They will actually show boredom during emotionally intense situations. They have an absence of fear. They show no distress when witnessing violence. And this might sound like dissociation, and they do. They do look similar on the surface, but emotional blunting is not the same as dissociation. Dissociation comes from trauma, the mind shutting down because it can't handle the pain. Emotional blunting is different. It's neurological. It's the absence of emotional response. These kids don't feel fear or guilt or empathy the way other children do because the brain systems responsible for those emotions aren't firing normally. And in girls, this is actually incredibly rare. Girls generally develop empathy earlier and more strongly than boys, and they almost always show higher empathy than boys at every developmental stage. So when you do see a girl with callous, unemotional traits, flat affect, no fear, no remorse, pleasure in cruelty, it's often an extreme case. Sharon Carr was and is one of those cases. So few traumatized children become killers because almost none of them have this collection of traits: the low empathy wiring, the underreactive amygdala, the impaired fear response, the abnormal reward system, the callous unemotional profile, the thrill-seeking, need for high stimulation. Yes, trauma is widespread. Sadism is rare, and thankfully the biology that allows sadism to grow is extremely rare. It's only when a child with this unusual neurological profile is placed in an environment of violence, chaos, and inconsistency that the perfect storm forms. But I would argue that even if Sharon Carr had been raised in a good family with good parents, she still would have been this way. She still would have been this way. We've seen it before. We've seen killers, and you look at their family life. Yeah, we've seen killers where it's like, oh yeah, I can see they had abusive parents or they had, hard childhoods. But we do see some killers that really didn't. They had good parents and they had normal lives, and they still ended up being sadistic. I think that with somebody that has this neurological profile, as unique as it is, I think it would have gone the same way for Sharon. I really do. Because just the act of not being able to feel empathy, the fact of getting pleasure from seeing other people's pain, that's still going to be there. Whether or not you're raised by good and loving parents, that's still going to be there. And people like this, they can't learn that stuff. The ability to encode that in their brain, those connections that are necessary, the space that is necessary for it, it's not there. So I guess the question is, should we feel sympathy for someone like Sharon Carr, knowing she was born with neurological wiring that created a violent psychopath? I don't feel sympathy for Sharon personally. But logically, I do understand that she is a person whose emotional machinery never formed correctly. It doesn't excuse her. It doesn't redeem her, but in a way, it explains her. And isn't that kind of what true crime is really about? I find it hard to express empathy for someone who is incapable of feeling it, incapable of giving it, incapable of feeling remorse for the pain she's inflicted on others, especially when she continued to inflict pain and continued to violently lash out at others and cause people to have to live in fear around her. Cases like Sharon Carr force us into a space most of us would rather avoid because they challenge the way we understand right and wrong, guilt and innocence, born and made. It's tempting to label someone like Sharon as a monster. And I mean, personally, I do believe like some people are just born bad. And in a way, whether, you believe in religion or God and the devil, in a way, those people are like demons on this earth because they don't have the capacity to be human. They don't have capacity to exhibit human traits, kindness, empathy, care, unconditional love, things like that. They can't do it. They don't know how. They don't have the ability to. So yeah, it's kind of like a demon is walking on earth among humans. So it's tempting to label someone like Sharon a monster because that creates distance and it makes the world feel safer, I guess. I don't know. It gives us a little compartment to put her into. But the truth is a bit more unsettling. Sharon wasn't shaped into a killer the way some children are. She came into the world with something missing, something fundamental to how the rest of us connect, empathize, and regulate ourselves and others. And once that collided with chaos and violence at home, what she became was almost inevitable. But like I said, I think that we probably would have seen behavior like this from her, even if she'd been born in, a solid, stable home to good parents. Now, that doesn't mean we excuse her. It doesn't mean we need to feel sorry for her. It means we acknowledge the reality that some people will never be safe, never be rehabilitated, and never understand or care about the damage they've done in the way we understand it and care about it. And that truth, the idea that someone can be so young, so damaged, and still so dangerous, it's honestly far more frightening than any label we could give her. Some people want to believe that every killer is made, not born. That if you dig deep enough, there's a tragic backstory that explains everything. But Sharon Carr shatters that illusion. Yes, her childhood was chaotic, but chaos doesn't turn a 12-year-old girl into someone who mutilates a stranger for pleasure. Millions of children are abused and neglected, and they never lay a hand on anyone in violence or hate. Sharon was different. Something in her was wrong from the start. Cold, predatory, unfeeling. She likened herself to an animal, right? The ultimate animal. Even animals feel more than Sharon felt. It's offensive to animals, honestly. And when the kind of mind that Sharon had, it collides with violence and instability, you don't get a troubled kid who needs help. You get someone who's dangerous in a way that most people will never understand. Sharon wasn't a victim who snapped. She wasn't redeemable, and she wasn't headed for any life but this one. You don't have to call her a monster to see the truth. Some people are simply born without the parts of the brain that make us human, and Sharon Carr is one of them. Sharon Carr has now spent more of her life behind bars than she ever spent outside of them, and every expert who's looked at her agrees. This is not a sentence she's serving. It's a containment. It's to not to punish her, but to protect other people from her. There is no treatment, no therapy, no course or program waiting to unlock some hidden potential or remorse. What was missing in her at 12 is still missing today. And personally, I think that's the part I struggle with the most. The idea that someone can be born so hollow in the places that make the rest of us human. It's so scary to think about. And, we know biologically and scientifically what it is in the brain that makes people like that. And I guarantee you, if we took a scan of Sharon Carr's brain, you would see exactly that and maybe more. But what causes that to happen? What causes the brain to develop that way? It's so odd. Maybe there is something, bigger than us that we don't understand, forming this, making this happen. I don't know. It forces us to confront a truth that we don't like to acknowledge, that evil doesn't always grow or evolve or announce itself. There's not always a reason for why somebody is evil. Sometimes evil simply arrives. It's born into the world. And when it does, all you can do is protect the world from it. So that's all I have for you. And I know this was probably a very intense video. I mean, I felt like it was very intense for me. It was a very intense video for me. It was a very intense case to research. I'm glad I stumbled upon it. I have, I've seen a lot of things doing these videos and researching these cases over the years, and you think you've seen it all. And then Sharon Carr presents herself to you randomly while you're researching another case, and maybe that was meant to be. I don't know, but either way, let me know what you think about this in the comments section. What are your thoughts? I know we talked about it a lot, but I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are. And don't forget to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, share the video if you think it's worth sharing. I will see you very, very soon, but until then, stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe. And until next time, love you so much. Bye.
Well, the levee don't break now, and the bottle's going straight down.